The manila envelope sat on Marcus Webb's workbench for 3 days before he opened it. It had arrived without warning. No return address. Just his name and the address of Webb's furniture restoration in faded ink. Marcus didn't trust unmarked packages. 20 years as a single father had taught him that unexpected things usually meant complications. But curiosity finally won out on a Thursday afternoon when business was slow and his daughter Riley was at college, 200 miles away, living the life he'd worked himself half to death to give her. Inside was a diary, leather-bound, worn at the edges, pages yellowed with age, and a note, handwritten on expensive stationery. Mr. Webb, I found your name in my mother's effects after she passed. I think she would have wanted you to have this. Perhaps it will explain things neither of us understood. It was signed Catherine Moreau. The name meant nothing to Marcus. He opened the diary carefully, his craftsman's hands gentle with the fragile binding. The first page, written in elegant script despite obvious difficulty, read, My name is Elizabeth Moreau. I am 32 years old. I am blind. I am in a wheelchair. And I am about to tell the truth I've hidden for 15 years because I'm dying and some truths shouldn't die with me. Marcus sat down hard on his work stool. Elizabeth Moreau. The name stirred something in his memory, something from 2 decades ago when his life had been different. Before Riley, before the furniture shop, before he'd become the man he was now. He started reading. I met Marcus Webb in the summer of 2003, Elizabeth's diary began. I was 17, working at my father's gallery in Portland. Marcus was 19, a carpenter's apprentice who'd been hired to build custom frames for an exhibition. I'd never believed in love at first sight until I saw him measuring wood with such careful precision. His hands moving like he was creating art instead of just building boxes. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He remembered that summer. Remembered the gallery with its high ceilings and expensive paintings. Remembered the girl who'd brought him coffee and asked questions about his work like it actually mattered. Elizabeth had been beautiful, confident. From a world so far removed from his that he'd never imagined she'd look at him twice. But she had. They'd spent that summer falling in love in stolen moments between his work shifts and her father's watchful eyes. She'd told him about her dreams of becoming a photographer, of traveling the world, capturing moments of beauty. He'd told her about wanting to build things that lasted, furniture that people would pass down through generations. My father hated Marcus, the diary continued. Not because Marcus wasn't good enough, though that's what he said, but because Marcus made me want things my father couldn't control. A life that wasn't planned and perfect and designed to reflect well on the Moreau family name. Marcus remembered Elizabeth's father. Richard Moreau, an art dealer worth millions. A man who'd made it clear that a carpenter's apprentice with no family and no prospects wasn't suitable for his daughter. Marcus had tried not to care, but the constant dismissal had worn him down. That August, everything changed, Elizabeth wrote. I was driving home from meeting Marcus. It was raining. I was distracted, thinking about how we were going to tell my father we wanted to be together. I didn't see the truck until it was too late. Marcus's hands shook. He'd heard about Elizabeth's accident, heard she'd been badly hurt. But by then, her father had made sure Marcus was gone. Richard had come to the construction site where Marcus worked and offered him money. $10,000 to leave Portland, to never contact Elizabeth again, to let her recover and move on with her life without the complication of a relationship her father deemed inappropriate. Marcus had refused at first. But then Richard had explained, his voice cold and certain, that Elizabeth's injuries were severe, that she'd need years of care and therapy. That Marcus, with his minimum wage job and his uncertain future, couldn't give her what she needed. That the kindest thing Marcus could do was let her go. I woke up in the hospital blind, the diary continued. The doctors said it was from the head trauma, possibly temporary, possibly permanent. They couldn't be sure. My legs were broken in multiple places. I'd need surgery, physical therapy, months of recovery. And through it all, I kept asking for Marcus. Kept begging my father to call him, to let him know what happened. Marcus felt sick. He'd taken Richard's money. Not because he wanted it, but because he'd believed what Richard said. That he couldn't help Elizabeth. that he'd only be a burden during her recovery, that loving her meant letting her go. He'd left Portland the next day, moved to Seattle, tried to build a life. 6 months later, he'd met Sarah, Riley's mother. She'd been kind and practical and nothing like Elizabeth. They'd married quickly, had Riley, built a life that was stable if not passionate. Sarah had died when Riley was 5. Cancer that came fast and left Marcus alone with a daughter to raise and furniture to restore and memories he tried not to examine too closely. "My father told me Marcus left," Elizabeth wrote, "that he'd come to the hospital once, seen how bad things were, and decided he couldn't handle it, that he'd taken money and disappeared. I didn't believe it at first. I couldn't believe the man I loved would abandon me when I needed him most. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and Marcus never came, never called, never wrote. Eventually, I had to accept that my father was right, that Marcus had chosen the easier path." Marcus read through tears now, understanding the terrible weight of what Richard Moreau had done. The lies he'd told his daughter, the way he'd manipulated both of them. Richard had paid Marcus to leave and told Elizabeth that Marcus had abandoned her. He'd destroyed their relationship to protect his vision of his daughter's future. "I spent 2 years in rehabilitation," the diary continued, "learning to navigate the world without sight, coming to terms with the wheelchair, with the reality that I'd never walk again. My photography dreams died. My independence died. I became exactly what my father wanted, dependent on him, controllable, safe. I hated him for it, but I also needed him. That's the terrible thing about losing everything. You cling to whatever's left, even if it's poisonous." The entries jumped forward in time. Elizabeth writing about learning Braille, about adaptive technologies, about small victories and crushing defeats. She wrote about men who tried to date her, seeing her disability as either something to fix or something that made her less than whole. She wrote about her father's increasing control, his insistence that she couldn't manage on her own, that she needed him. "I'm 32 now," one entry read. "My father died last month. Heart attack, sudden and final. And in his papers I found something that broke me all over again. A receipt for $10,000, paid to Marcus Webb in August 2003. And a letter never sent, where my father detailed exactly what he'd told Marcus to make him leave. How he'd convinced Marcus that leaving was the loving thing to do." Marcus closed his eyes, grief and rage and regret washing over him. Richard Moreau had played them both, had destroyed their chance at happiness to satisfy his own need for control. "I've spent the last month trying to decide what to do with this information," Elizabeth continued. "Part of me wants to find Marcus, to tell him the truth, to see if there's anything left of what we had. But I'm not that girl anymore. I'm blind. I'm in a wheelchair. I'm bitter and damaged and nothing like the person Marcus fell in love with. How could I ask him to want me now?" The entries became sporadic after that. Elizabeth writing about her declining health, about the cancer that was slowly killing her, about her daughter Catherine, born from a brief relationship years ago, the one good thing in her complicated life, about regrets and missed chances and the weight of carrying the truth alone. The final entry was dated 3 months ago. "I'm dying. The doctors give me weeks, maybe days. Catherine will inherit everything, including the truth about Marcus. I've written her a letter explaining what happened, why I never tried to find him. I hope she'll understand. I hope Marcus will too, if she decides to tell him. I spent 15 years hating him for abandoning me, and another 2 years understanding that he didn't, that we were both victims of my father's manipulation. I forgive Marcus. I forgive my father, though that's harder. Mostly, I forgive myself for not being brave enough to search for the truth sooner. If there's an afterlife, if I get another chance, I'll choose differently. I'll choose love over fear. I'll choose truth over comfort. I'll choose Marcus." Marcus sat in his workshop as evening shadows lengthened, the diary in his hands, tears on his face. He'd spent 20 years believing he'd made the right choice, the noble choice by walking away. Now he understood he'd been manipulated, that both he and Elizabeth had lost decades because of one man's need for control. His phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Webb. A woman's voice, young, uncertain. This is Catherine Moreau. I sent you my mother's diary. I just finished reading it, Marcus said, his voice rough. I'm so sorry. About your mother, about everything. I needed you to know the truth, Catherine said. My mother spent so much of her life carrying pain that wasn't hers to carry. I thought you might be doing the same. Marcus admitted. I thought I'd abandoned her. Thought I'd chosen money over love. Your grandfather made sure I believed that. He was good at that, making people believe his version of reality. Catherine's voice was bitter. My mother deserved better. You both did. They talked for an hour. Catherine told him about Elizabeth's life, about the woman she'd become despite everything. Strong, creative, running an adaptive technology nonprofit from her home, helping other people with disabilities navigate a world that wasn't built for them. She'd made meaning from her pain, had refused to let tragedy define her completely. She never stopped loving you, Catherine said quietly. She didn't say it directly, but I could tell. The way she'd get quiet when someone mentioned Portland or carpentry, or that summer before the accident. You were her what if, her road not taken. She was mine too, Marcus said. I married someone else, had a daughter I love more than anything. But there was always this space in my heart where Elizabeth lived. Where that summer lived. I thought I'd lost it through my own cowardice. Knowing the truth doesn't change what happened, but it changes how I understand it. After they hung up, Marcus sat with the diary for a long time. He thought about calling Riley, telling her about this woman from his past, this love story that had been destroyed by lies. But Riley was studying for finals, building her own life. This was his burden to carry, his grief to process. He opened his laptop and started writing. A letter to Elizabeth, even though she'd never read it. Telling her everything he wished he'd said 20 years ago. That he'd loved her. That he'd thought of her constantly. That walking away had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. And he'd only done it because he'd believed it was what she needed. That he was sorry. So desperately sorry for not fighting harder. For not questioning Richard's story. For not trusting their love enough to weather the storm. He wrote until his hands cramped and his eyes burned. Then he printed the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in the diary. Tomorrow he'd send it to Catherine. Maybe she'd read it at Elizabeth's grave. Maybe she'd keep it private. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth was finally complete. That both sides of the story existed somewhere in the world. Marcus thought about the furniture he restored, the broken pieces he carefully repaired and refinished. Some damage couldn't be undone. Some breaks left permanent scars. But even damaged things could be beautiful, could be functional, could serve their purpose and carry their history with dignity. He and Elizabeth had been broken by circumstances and manipulation. They'd lost their chance at a life together. But they'd both survived. Both built meaningful lives from the wreckage. Elizabeth had helped countless people through her nonprofit. Marcus had raised a daughter who was strong and kind and ready to change the world in her own way. Their love story didn't have a happy ending. But maybe that was okay. Maybe some stories were meant to teach rather than satisfy. To remind people that time is precious, that truth matters, that love is worth fighting for even when the odds seem impossible. Marcus locked up the workshop and walked home through Seattle's evening streets. Tomorrow he'd call Catherine again. Maybe visit Portland, see Elizabeth's grave, pay his respects to the woman who'd shaped his life even in her absence. Maybe meet Catherine properly, this daughter of the woman he'd loved, and see if there was any peace to be found in connection. But tonight he'd sit with the diary and remember. Remember that summer when everything had seemed possible. Remember a girl with dreams of photography and a boy who wanted to build things that lasted. Remember that love, even love that ends in tragedy and separation, still matters, still shapes who we become, still deserves to be honored and remembered and grieved. The truth inside Elizabeth's diary had shocked him, but it had also freed him from 20 years of believing he'd failed her. Freed him to finally grieve what they'd lost and celebrate what they'd briefly had. Freed him to understand that some stories don't end. They just transform, becoming part of the foundation we build our lives upon. Marcus Webb had been a carpenter, a furniture restorer, a single father. Now he understood he was also a man who'd been loved deeply, who'd loved in return, and who'd carried that love forward even when he didn't fully understand its weight. That was enough. It had to be enough. Because the past couldn't be changed, but its meaning could be rewritten. And in that rewriting, there was a kind of redemption. Not complete, not perfect, but real. And sometimes real was all you could ask for.